First on the agenda is public comments. We have got a request from citizen Edward Walsh as requested to address the board as it regards to CRT. Yes, sir.
Well, actually, I don't intend to even mention CRT.
Okay, sorry about that.
No problem. First, in preface, I have looked at the biographical backgrounds of each of you gentlemen, and I want to salute you. You have added a great deal to this county in your professional lives, and you are to be commended for that, and I would be amiss if I didn't recognize that. And so congratulations to you, and I thank you as an individual. I'm a bit nervous. A few years ago, I was in northern Jordan working with people running from ISIS, and I'm about as nervous now as I was then. So, and I was scared then, quite frankly, because they'd take my head and roll it for a bowling ball if they'd have caught me. Teaching history of slavery and racism in our schools. I've worked with young people all my life in universities, including Harvard, Yale, MIT, Tufts, and all the schools. Slavery, often referred to as America's original sin, and its systemic carryover into our modern history can be found in everything from our stock exchange to our prison systems. As a student of history of the United States, I, along with those far more deeply acquainted with our textbooks of history, find that these textbooks deliver what has often been referred to as slavery light, versions of slavery's past in our nation's history. In Germany, schools are legally mandated to teach the factual brutality of the Holocaust and not a sanitized version that would neglect the horrible truth of this past of Germany's history. In the United States, and sadly here in Johnston County, there are those who want to whitewash our history and racism by calling it divisive and dangerous. Rather than insist this history be taught to our youth, unlike Germany, there are those who seek to hide the truth and facts in the teaching to our students. I prefer to hear and accept the words of a fifth grade teacher who remarked about the teaching of history of slavery and racism in our schools to our children when she says, and I quote, "It's called good teaching, to tell truths and have students look at a variety of experiences and a rich landscape of experiences. Otherwise, it's called propaganda." Studies have been conducted surveying high school seniors and social studies teachers. It was found in one survey only 8% of the students surveyed could identify slavery as a primary cause of the Civil War. In addition, only about 25% could identify how the United States Constitution gave advantages to slaveholders. Another survey indicated that 58% of the teachers who responded indicated that their textbooks gave inadequate addressing to the issue of slavery and racism in our history. I fully agree with the statement of Kevin Wellner, Professor of Education at the University of Colorado and Director of the National Education Policy Center. A lie is always more a threat than the truth, even when the truth is painful. Our children need to know the painful truth of racism. I believe that the purpose of our educational system is to build under our students a launching platform which they can excel upward into a brighter, productive, successful future, to produce informed, creative kids who have been given the tools of independent, critical thinking. Education should open minds to facts, science, and our history, not close doors to facts, history, and science, which regressive thinking adults who prefer to hide facts and truth from them, as as exhibited by some. One of the most brutal killings of a slave took place in 1899 to Sam Hose when he was murdered by several hundred people in Coweta County, Georgia. And if I were teaching, I would make students study this particular killing. This was a 20-year-old farmhand who was accused, without a trial, of killing his employer and raping his employer's wife. A mob of local citizens chained Hose to a tree, cut off his ears, fingers, and genitals, while the so-called Christian folks cheered and sang church hymns. It was not unusual to have lynched slaves set on fire while still alive. Once the evil deed was done, some onlookers would break off a finger or a toe to take home as a souvenir. This is our history. This is what we did. And we talk about the Taliban. And we talk about ISIS. We did it. And we called ourselves Christians. Today's students in our public secondary schools must be taught this tragic period of the history of slavery and racism that has infected the soul of our nation and lives on today in the background stories of our black brothers and sisters. It is our Holocaust. The future of our democracy depends upon our students understanding this past. Teaching our history of slavery and racism is not airing our dirty laundry. It is about bearing the hidden roots of racism, the source of injustice in our modern society. So help me God.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. All right, it is public comment time. It is a time for anyone in the audience that would like to address this board on any issue that is not on the agenda for 3 to 5 minutes. Yes, ma'am. Hi, how are you doing? We generally like you to state your name and address for the record.
My name is Jean Cazenave. I live in Benson. I've never been here before, but pleasure to see you all. Thanks for letting me speak tonight. I'm going to talk to you about an issue that's different than what you usually hear. So I'd like to share some information that would be in all of our interest to push our legislators for a full forensic audit. So I know several of you are up for election this year, and I think it would be prudent for us to do that. I have a lot of information here, and some of the research that we've done comes from Seth Keshel. I'm not sure if you're familiar with who he is, but he is a former U.S. military intelligence officer and a statistical analyst. He compared trends of voter registration to actual votes and found some alarming anomalies in areas proven to be most reliable for hundreds of years. For example, we've had in North Carolina was one of the states targeted for cheating. We've had excess Biden vote estimates in Johnston County with over 10,000. Alamance, Brunswick, Buncombe, Cabarrus, Cumberland, Forsyth, Gaston, Guilford, Henderson, Iredell, and Mecklenburg, New Hanover, Onslow, and Wake were all targeted counties for that. I'm not sure when the last time it was that our machines were maintained and who is present when that happens, and when is the last time our voter rolls have been purged. The voting machines are not secure. The data gets on a thumb drive and it gets downloaded to the election managers or the judge's server, and many counties in multiple states store the data in the cloud. And there's Amazon servers in Frankfurt, Germany, and the state Secretary of State receives that information from Germany. So I have some information here for all of you. I printed 7 packages, if you will, of all kinds of information that you could look into for if you want to do your own research. There was a ton of research that we have done in the group that I'm a member of that has gone into this project, and we have been visiting our legislators. What is the name of that group? Liberty First Grassroots.
Okay.
We have visited our legislators since April once a month this year and asked them to look into forensic audit, and they said, no, there's no fraud in North Carolina, but we're all learning that there was. So even though we came out ahead with all the ones that we wanted, except Cooper and some others that were up for re-election, but they were still cheating. So if you're interested, there is somebody that you might want to look at. He has a YouTube video, Facebook and Gab from August 25th. He was in the Epoch Times. His name is Trevor Loudon, and he has done extensive research on the Communist Party in China, and they are working diligently to flip North Carolina. So you might want to look at that video. It's very intriguing, so.
Ma'am, if you want to
appreciate-
leave those, that information with the clerk.
Okay, I left a copy for everybody.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to address this board on any issue that is not on the agenda for tonight? All right. If not, do we have any emails, Madam Clerk? No emails. All right. Case 2111. I'm going to open the rezoning hearing, and I'm going to call on BRASTON for the case background.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Good evening. So this is case 21-11 is your first two cases this evening, each of which involve it's a down zoning. This first case is petition to rezone 2.56 acre tract located at 3469 US 70 East in the Pine Level Township from general business to agriculture residential. Owner Anthony and Martha House. The applicant is Courtney Lanning and Martha House. The property is zoned general business and it currently is vacant. There is no improvements to the property. Surrounding zonings and land uses are AR and used for agricultural and residential purposes, and general business and use for various businesses. So this property is very near the Pine Level city limits, just for a point of reference. So the traffic count on US 70 East in this area is 28,000 vehicles per day. This is a 2019 count. And obviously 70 East does appear on our comprehensive transportation plan as an existing freeway needing improvement. Land use plan does designate this area as a primary growth area. And staff does recommend approval, or does recommend approval. Be glad to answer any questions you may have about this particular case.
Any questions for BRASTON?
I do, Mr. Chairman. This land is vacant. There was a house on it, wasn't there?
There's a house. I don't think the house is being utilized when we mean vacant, being no actual land use or no utilization of the house, my understanding.
Okay.
Any more questions for
What
BRASTON?
would you call that vacant?
If the house is vacant, I call it vacant, but the land use
Okay.
there is a home on it. But however, it could be used, the house could be used, under the current zoning, could be used for a business.
Any more questions? If not, we'll hear from the applicant. If you would state your name and address for the record.
Marcia House. I live in Pine Level, North Carolina. So I'm just here on behalf of what Braston was just saying, just asking for it to be rezoned from general business to residential agriculture. It's our family land there. It was my husband's grandmother's house, and we're planning on eventually remodeling it for our daughter to live there. It's on our family land, so that's what we're asking.
Any questions for the applicant? If not, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody here from the public that would like to speak on this case? For or against? Okay, I'm going to close the public discussion portion of the hearing and call on BRASTON to summarize and present Planning Board's recommendation.
Yes, sir. With regard to case 21-11, Planning Board does recommend approval and offers for your consideration a statement of consistency.
Any questions for BRASTON? If not, I'll close the rezoning hearing.
I move to adopt the statement of consistency resolution as presented in the agenda packet and approve the rezone request.
Second.
We got a motion, we got a second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of the motion? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next on the agenda is case 2114. I'm going to open the rezoning hearing and call BRASTON to summarize.
Yes, sir. Case 21-14 is petition to rezone a 1.58 acre tract located at 10294 Buffalo Road in Wilder's Township, community business. The property is currently zoned community business special use district. The request is to rezone to agriculture residential. Owner and applicant is Deborah Vereen. As stated, the property is currently zoned community business with the special use district. The the special use allowed as convenience store with a restaurant. I understand that this is not currently in operation. The surrounding land uses in that area are agricultural, residential, and used for such purposes. The traffic count on Buffalo Road in this area is 9,100 vehicles per day as a 2019 count, and Buffalo Road does appear on a comprehensive transportation plan as an existing minor thoroughfare with adequate design capacity. The land use plan does designate this as a primary growth area. Staff does recommend approval of the request.
Any questions for BRASTON?
Bush.
If not, we'll hear from the applicant. If you would state your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening. My name is James Vereen. I'm the husband of Deborah Vereen, and I'm here at the request of the board and to ask y'all consideration for this project being rezoned. We would like to have it as residential area versus agriculture. And if there's any other questions that I can answer, because he did a wonderful job of explaining everything.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? If not, thank you. Is anybody here to speak for or against case 2114? If not, I'm going to close the public discussion portion of the hearing and call on BRASTON to summarize and present planning board's recommendation.
Yes, sir. Regarding case 21-14, planning board does recommend approval and offers for your consideration statement of consistency.
Any questions for BRASTON? If not, I'm going to close the rezoning hearing. What's the pleasure of the board?
Move to adopt a statement of consistency resolution as presented in the agenda packet and approve the rezone request for 21-14.
Second. Got a motion, got a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next on our agenda is the town of Princeton, request for funding, drainage, and water line projects. I guess the great mayor of Princeton will start it off.
Thank you all for reviewing our proposal, and we look forward to a good partnership with the county to help our drainage and water line issues that are part of our town. First I want to ask Tyrus Clayton, PE from Draper Aden, and his associate Matthew Burnett, who is a flood specialist, to address the board with a presentation.
Welcome.
Thank
You
you.
would state your name and address for the record.
Appreciate it.
I guess he just told you.
Hearing this tonight. My name is Tyrus Clayton. I work for Draper Aden Associates. I've had a long history with the town of Princeton. I've worked for them on quite a few projects since about the year 2000. So that town has a very close place to my heart. Have a lot of friends and family there now over the years. This is Matt Burnett from our office. He is a key part of our stormwater team and has put a lot of effort here recently into town with their stormwater program. I'm going to take you back a little bit in history with the town of Princeton. Back in 2003, the town undertook an asset management project. It was a little bit ahead of their time, actually. It's about 20 years ahead of time, considering some of the recent efforts a lot of towns are undertaking right now. They studied their entire town and actually mapped their water, sewer, and stormwater systems in their entirety, and actually started looking at some flooding issues they were having at the time, and identified 11 small projects throughout that town for upgrades and rehabilitation. And over the next several years, they actually completed 5 of those projects with their own forces, with their own funding in town, and also started some conversations based upon some of those infrastructure issues they were looking at actually being under the ownership of NCDOT and the North Carolina Railroad. And on through about 2014, they completed several of those projects and identified some new ones, and actually successfully made some improvements across the town to help with drainage projects. And then, of course, in 2016, Hurricane Matthew hit. pretty major event for both Princeton, Johnston County, and also the state of North Carolina. As you can see there on the screen, that was a major event for town Princeton. Most of that town was underwater. A lot of residents, a lot of the commercial businesses, and a lot of the townsfolk were greatly impacted. A lot of people lost a lot of their property, and it really impacted their lives. So the town of Princeton, going forward, they really put a lot of effort into looking at how they could improve their drainage infrastructure. In 2017, they contacted our firm, and we really started looking at the Beaver Dam Creek, which is the main drainage way throughout the town there, right through the center of town, and started looking at a feasibility study to identify some improvements there. Not knowing how the funding was going to finally shake out, we actually looked at 3 phases of the project, and in 2017 started looking at the first phase of that. And then in 2017-18, DOT actually started doing some work on downtown on Pine Street, something we had identified back in 2005. And then, of course, in 2018, Hurricane Florence hit the area. It was not as significant of an event as Matthew, but still some serious flooding occurred in the town of Princeton. A lot of that downtown area was once again underwater, up inside buildings, lots of damage. 2018, they went ahead and identified some needs and put us to work on the downtown drainage rehab project at the same time as looking at that Beaver Dam Creek. And then this year, we are actually in construction on 2 of those projects. So those 2 projects that are outlined in the blue, which is the phase 1 of the Beaver Dam project, outlined in red there is the downtown drainage rehabilitation. The Beaver Dam Creek drainage strategy in 2017 was split into 3 phases. It's mainly to obtain easements, upsize some existing culverts, and to regrain and armor some stream banks. Phase 1 of that is basically upsizing the most downstream culvert there on Pearl Street, which is in conjunction on the DOT drainage way, and repairing some highly eroded stream banks and armoring them. Currently, there is actually a main sewer line that feeds the Princeton High School that is in risk of failure. We're going to repair that also. That total project cost is about $500,000, which was funding through some Gulf relief money from Hurricane Matthew relief. The unfunded portion of that project is about $800,000 that has not been started yet. The downtown drainage project that we started in 2018, we quickly identified the key part of that project were 2 undersized culverts going under the railroad tracks there in town. Let's just say the railroad has been quite a joy to deal with. They have caused us about 2 years of delay and quite a bit of money cost-wise. Overall, it's cost us about an additional about $750,000 worth of additional costs there. Really didn't change the design of the project, but we finally have our permits, approvals, and that project is finally going forward. We actually bid those 2 projects together, trying to save some money through construction costs, which it actually did, and they are actually in construction right now. Total cost of this part of the project was about $1 million. It was also funded through some Golden Leaf grant money we obtained, and we are looking forward to getting these things in place in the next 12 months. So Matt's going to actually talk about some of the future work we've identified for the town.
Yeah, thanks, Tyrus. Again, I'm Matt Burnett. I work with Tyrus, kind of head up our stormwater work here in North Carolina. So, called this kind of the unfunded drainage infrastructure needs, and kind of following up on the stuff that Tyrus talked about. Last summer in July 2020, the town had a storm event, unnamed storm event, of about 5.5 inches of rain in 30 minutes. And whenever we have an event like that, we're going to have flooding problems. There's nothing that we can do to get around that. But that kind of spurred the town to really say, let's look at the entire town, and let's look at all other areas where we have any types of problems, and figure out what we can do sort of as a town-wide study. Let's look at everything. Let's identify projects and prioritize them, and really sort of get us a kind of a stormwater CIP for say mapped out for additional work. First area that we looked at was further south on South Pine Street, just as you get out of town. And this area is Cloverdale subdivision is a newer subdivision in town that was frequently flooding. And we looked at this first, and what could we do in this area to help out here. Building on our initial study, we sat down with DOT in late 2020, as that work involved 3 culvert crossings that were in DOT's right of way. And we sat down with them, and DOT has graciously agreed to complete that work. Then we sort of backed out and looked at some other areas in town. We've got them listed here, and I'll sort of go into detail of these on the next couple slides. And then finally, just in July of this year, we had another large rain event, unnamed storm, that inundated basically the town of Princeton. So, the town's really making an effort to be proactive here, but our storm events, as we all know, are changing in intensity and duration and frequency. So it's not a problem that's going away. This map kind of shows sort of the locations of some of these different areas. It's kind of hard to see up there, but the phase 2 and phase 3 of that original Beaver Dam Creek study done in 2017 are shown kind of in the center. And these other 5 studies that I mentioned are sort of all around town. And this just kind of shows that geographically we're really looking at the whole town where there are problems at. It's not, focused on one area. We're trying to understand the whole big picture and how everything's related. The first project that we looked at in 2020 is really affecting this Cloverdale subdivision. This is a newer subdivision in town. And we basically, the town engaged us to do sort of a preliminary study and identify improvements. And we actually identified 3 DOT culverts that are significantly undersized. And then some work outside of DOT right away. It was town culverts and some ditches that were off grade and didn't mesh well as a system. Actually, one of these pipes in between Pine Street and Center Street ran underneath a house. And we knew, the town, realizing that was going to be kind of step 1 to fixing the problem, has already purchased that property and demolished the house so that we were ready to go to work. And we sat down with DOT, and DOT has been extremely helpful in this. They actually agreed, we presented our analysis to them and kind of showed them what we were looking at. And they agreed to replace all of their culverts with our recommended culvert sizes and in their right of way. And they actually have told the town that the town will purchase the pipe for areas outside the DOT right of way. DOT will complete the construction at no cost to the town. So they've been really good to work with on this. Got 4 of the 5 projects left that we've looked at recently. 2 here, Eagles Crest is a subdivision on the north side of 70. Azalea Drive is an older subdivision from south side of 70. Both of these areas, drainage problems, frequent flooding, ponding of water, several days. We went through this same process, and we determined that the stormwater systems in these areas are significantly undersized for development that's occurred and then for the storm events that we see today. Both of these, actually, to really see a benefit, are going to involve upsizing culverts underneath US 70. On these, that's not it's a little different scale of upsizing the culvert underneath the secondary road. So we've reached out to DOT. They're currently reviewing our analysis and have agreed to work with us to address these, with the understanding that the town complete the work outside of DOT right away at the same time so that everything functions together. Last 2 projects that we have on here, South Walnut Street is an area in the southern part of town that kind of ties into the South Pine Street area that I mentioned. Again, some DOT involvement, some work needs to be done, ditch maintenance outside DOT right away. And then kind of the west part of downtown that wasn't looked at before, West 1st, 2nd John Street, this drains to a 3rd culvert underneath the railroad that is significantly undersized. And we know that we're going to need to upgrade that culvert along with several additional culverts in the area to really decrease flooding in the area. Another thing kind of in closing here that the town is also currently doing is, they realize that if we're able to get these projects implemented and get them constructed, we have to have a way to maintain them in the future and prevent like issues from happening. The town is currently engaged to develop a stormwater management ordinance to review future development and put measures in place to put some of this on the developer in the future to prevent these things from happening. And we're evaluating means that the town could come to fund some of the work, whether it be with town staff, public works staff, to perform some of this routine maintenance. Now, Cyrus is going to shift gears back from drainage to for the utility project.
So the town and county have always been great partners.
Chair, can we ask some questions before we move on to the water line issues?
Yeah, because I think we've got 2 issues on the table tonight, and you're covering both of them. So thank you, Mr. Lauder. Let's tackle this one.
Sure.
Okay. So, and I don't know, it may be one of the figures, and I'm looking at ours, but where the drainage area, I know you've identified areas where the problems are, but how big is this drainage area that we're talking about? And then probably the follow-up question is looking to the growth of Princeton, are these measures going to be adequate for whatever future growth that you see coming?
So the areas we've identified are primarily immediate needs, areas that are currently flooding or in current conditioning. The The way we've analyzed it is we're looking at with some potential growth numbers included in it, with the upsized culvert locations. So
And I'm assuming that's tied to whatever the planning
yes,
folks there.
making some guesses like
Yeah.
anything else,
Okay.
with future growth patterns. With those downtown projects, I mean, that's a pretty urbanized area of downtown. They're not gonna be too much more built out in those areas. Those are pretty well-developed, impervious areas of downtown. With these fringe areas that we're talking about for future growth, the ones that Matt just talked about, we do realize that some of those have the potential to get a little more dense. They're currently pretty residential areas with some potential for future residential areas. What Matt is talking about also is we're currently working with the town to create an ordinance to look at stormwater management measures for any of those areas outside of town. We're not seeing any potential flooding issues right now, so that there's some self-sustaining flood mitigation measures actually on the future development sites themselves, very similar to what the county sort of has employed with their ordinances currently for both quantity and quality controls within the sites. Puts it back on the developer to institute some of those structures on site during the development process, but also looking at instituting maybe potentially a stormwater utility so that it's self-funding, so we're not coming back to you in future years and saying, hey, we'd like some more money. We're not looking to do that. Town of Princeton's always, and we're hoping to trying to show you that, is they're trying to be very proactive in their approach and trying to take care of their own business the best they can.
Yeah, when you talk about asset management programs that are 20 years old for a town that's Princeton size is pretty forward-thinking.
Yeah.
That's one point that we wanted to make. I mean, you see Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, Charlotte doing that kind of work now.
Right.
And Princeton actually had us on the ground surveying every manhole, water valve, stormwater pipe in 2003. So it's pretty impressive for a town.
I mean, it didn't start with stormwater, it did start with their utility package. They had a water and sewer master plan in place in 2005. So they've been systematically going through their utility system and making upgrades throughout the years. Now, they've not seen the speed and growth that the western part of the county has seen, but we see it coming, and that's why this has sort of become a forefront within what they're trying to do is we know it's coming to Princeton eventually.
Yeah, that's kind of my question, to make sure that today's fix is looking somewhere down the road based on some reasonable estimate of future growth.
Some of those growth numbers and what our projections are with these designs that we're putting in the ground. For instance, on that South Pine Street, DOT was actually out there today trying to dig a hole to put a piece of pipe in. We were like, wait a minute, guys. You can't just put a piece of pipe in the ground. We've got some planning to do to make sure we've got coordination and sizing, and it ain't just about replacing a pipe and putting it in the ground. We've got to look at the whole system as a whole. And,
Excuse me, I have a question. This area downtown, the remedies you're looking at is primarily expanding larger drainage ditches and larger culverts, or are they new proposed ditches, that type of thing?
No, we're looking at existing infrastructure. We're not adding any new ditches or new piping. It's actually taking advantage of what's there now and expanding the size of it.
Right.
The area we're actually looking for funding today is primarily, the first priorities is some residential areas on the south side of town. To back up, is there a pointer on this particular pipe?
The area that we're looking at here is this. It's kind of outlined in orange and green on the two southern areas there. And to answer your question sort of earlier about the drainage area, what you see in orange and green, those are two drainage areas, the entire drainage area. And basically what we do when we set up our analysis is we look at, we run the existing condition just sort of so that it's undersized for today. Then we kind of go on a parcel by parcel basis and say, how's this on, what's kind of the worst case scenario? And then sort of what's the worst reasonable assumption scenario, and kind of run with those to, make sure that we're not designing something that's going to be too small.
Look at their future land use plan too. So
Right.
what does the town want to be there 20 years from now? Knowing that, Princeton has a vision. It ain't just about what wants to come. Princeton's going to try to control what growth is coming in that area.
I'm just, which way does it go to that feature to the south and east?
It travels to the south, what would be bottom right of your screen.
Okay.
It's traveling.
You see the ball fields? It actually goes down the DOT right away along ball fields and then out through the farm field to the southeast of the baseball.
Okay.
And think about Princeton, it's flat. When I say flat, that whole drainage area, we've got probably, less than 2 feet of fall.
Wow.
So
There's 2
it's a
feet of
challenge.
fall between Princeton and England. I mean, it's fine.
So it's been a challenge.
And I guess my last question, you'd mentioned the railroad. Is there any maintenance burdens that they place on, I know in other places we've seen a lot of maintenance burdens placed on people repairing it.
Story about the railroad in Princeton. The Princeton Railroad takes up pretty much all of downtown, from door front to door front, is to how the Butch Railroad right away is. From front doors on one side of the buildings across the road to the other front door. So Princeton's pretty proud of what their downtown looks like. They cut the grass between the sidewalks. The town of Princeton actually had the railroad come to them and say, we're going to charge you because you cut your grass. So maintenance requirements in the railroad is always an issue. The town of Princeton has paid quite a bit of money for the permits to actually do the work we're trying to do there. We've had to relocate some of the town's utilities to do the stormwater work, and we had to pay double for that. So we had to pay the railroad to relocate the town's utilities to put the new stormwater piping in that the railroad put in inadequately, that didn't meet the railroad standards originally. So it's been a costly endeavor to get these plants in place. Long-term maintenance costs, there is a maintenance agreement in place now. It has been funded through the existing grant money we did put in place. The initial money we actually obtained from Golden Week was not sufficient, but we were lucky enough that we went back and asked for additional funding. They increased the funding to cover it here in the last year. They were very understanding and had some money left over in that fund balance to be able to increase that funding for the project. But that's not a fund that's not available, I don't think anymore.
Any more questions on this particular phase of the request? Okay, you feel free to enter to your next phase.
Okay. So this next part of the presentation is about a potential utility project. So that's like I said, the county and the town have been great partners over the years. And we've had a joy of, I've known Chandra probably 20 plus years now. We went through school together way back when. So back in, town shut their wells down many, many years ago and started purchasing water from the county. It's a better source of water, higher quality water. Back in 2009, we had the opportunity to join with the town with the county and had the ability on an elevated water storage tank through several funding sources to elevate that tank, increase pressures, had the opportunity to add a mixing system there, benefit both the county and the town together. So we're always looking for opportunities like that to join up with the county to serve the county's customers and the town's customers, to benefit both of them. So we had the opportunity here recently to look at a potential project south of town that would benefit both the county and the town. So on the south side of town is the Brogden Water District, and it has a line that dead ends right south of town. And then there's a gap between that water district and the town of Princeton where there's no public water system available for a little stretch there. The town of Princeton is fed from the county on the north side of town, down 70 in a couple locations. So there's a potential project here we identified back last year and had some conversations with the county utility department that would actually benefit both the county and the town from several different aspects. I think Chandra passed out a little presentation packet that her facility actually put together also. So it actually would improve water quality for both systems. It provides an interconnection between the two water systems. It would provide an emergency connection for both the town and the county system, so we have an ability to supply water in two different directions for both systems. Allows for flushing of water so you don't have stagnation on that dead end line, and also on the south side of town. It also provides for additional pressure reliefs and additional fire flow capabilities, so we can add additional fire hydrants and actually add additional fire hydrants on this new 8-inch connection line we're proposing. And at the same time, what's not as much as a benefit for the county, it does add a benefit for the town of Princeton, is we could add additional connections for some additional connections there for the town of Princeton on the south side of town, which would increase our tax base. So it is a good project. Town would like to see happen, and I think the county could benefit from it also. The estimated cost of that's about $400,000.
Any questions on this phase of the request, the water line?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I got one. When you say may create more tap homes in regard to Was that a commercial area or a housing area or?
Currently, that's in an area that's not been looked at heavily for growth for town of Princeton. I mean, I would assume, based on some conversations we have had with some potential buyers, it would probably be residential. Right now, the commercial interest in town of Princeton have been internal to the city limits. We're out on 170. This would probably be more attainable to residential. It's right near their ball field facilities and closer to the elementary school. So we don't really see this as a commercial area.
Any more questions on this phase of the request?
I was just going to make sure the section we're talking about kind of is in that south end where, I guess it's Pine, is that South Pine area?
It'd be south of South Pine.
Okay.
It was on, if you go back a couple of slides, that larger map. So you see the ball field right there south of town? It's actually down that same road, the ball field.
Okay. I didn't have any other questions.
Any more questions?
So we did have a real quick summary slide, just sort of summarize what we're all looking at there. So we listed all our drainage improvements. So total funding, I mean, the town's needs, as we realize you may not be able to help us with everything, even though if you can, we'll greatly accept it. It's about $3.2 million, right? That's what we've estimated with everything we've got on the table. Of those, we've prioritized some things. Of course, that South Pine Street, with DOT willing to help us right now and literally willing to go dig a hole and put some pipe in the ground, we'd really like to get that one finished as quick as possible. That with the South Walnut Street, which is closely tied to it, and a little bit of work in the downtown area, that's about $715,000. And then, of course, that waterline project's about $400,000. And that's some estimations we've been working on for the last year. But we have increased that based upon some material costs from last year. And I'm sure y'all heard that with some of the conversations. PVC pipe and the market's been running here too. But.
Okay, we've heard the request. Obviously, we're probably going to have some discussion on it.
Yes, sir.
Please stand
And
by.
I'd like to come up and have a few closing statements too.
Okay, but I would advise this board, obviously, we've got two funding requests here that are two separate projects, one to the tune of $700 some odd and one $400. So I hope part of the discussion that we break those down as two different projects.
Absolutely.
Right. Mayor?
We're available for questions if you're ready.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. I have a question while these do passed out. Where's this water go to when it leaves?
The water, there are 3 drainage basins. The water in the southern end of town goes to Beaver Dam Creek, which ultimately goes into Wayne County, and after a lot of meandering around, it ends up in Neuse River. The northern end of town predominantly goes to Little River, and US 70 acts sort of as a dam because there's not enough culverts under 70 Highway to go to Little River in an expedient manner.
Does the Moccasin Creek drainage figure in anywhere here?
Around the elementary school, that drainage goes towards Moccasin Creek, which goes into Neuse River.
Okay.
So we do have alternative draining basins, but we got to get the water there. Which leads to another, Beaver Dam Creek flows east into Wayne County. But Beaver Dam Creek has a name, and it's appropriate because in our ETJ to Wayne County, there's about 10 to 15 beaver dams that are blocking water from flowing into Wayne County and further east. So USDA Wildlife is working with us to break up those beaver dams and relocate the beavers to whatever appropriate spot they need to go to. So that is one leg of the drainage. The what I wanted to address and what I have in front of you is this funding is available through the American Rescue Plan for the water line and for the flood mitigation. So there is funds outside the county tax base to fund this project. It will reduce exposure to public health, the flooding, flash floods, and tropical rainstorms are just more than we could handle in Princeton without putting this flood mitigation program together. The rain event, June 26, was 8 inches in 3 hours. And last year, if you're familiar, on Amelia Church Road, you had 16 or 17 inches within a few hours. So we're needing to address resilience to climate change and weather pattern changes that we have not seen in my lifetime until the last 5 or 6 years. Also, this plan will help reduce loss to property value from flooding, and the loss from the most recent storm I'm estimating to be $500,000. Several homes were underwater. They're not inhabitable at this point. The school, several classrooms at the school was flooded. The football field was underwater. There were businesses downtown that were underwater. Certainly this project will help in situations where there's excess rain and hopefully eliminate some of the flooding, but with hurricanes we want to be resilient and come back quickly. It will improve quality of life for the entire community, prevent disease, add to economic recovery as defined in the American Rescue Plan, and it also will protect county assets such as the Princeton Middle School, High School, and Princeton Elementary and the EMS facility because it's located within 100 yards of Beaver Dam Creek. So it's got potential flooding if this project doesn't move forward. The water line will enhance water quality for the town and the county, and we're currently getting annual letters we have to send out because the water quality is just, it's dead end lines, and the water quality in some areas are just not good. Additional fire protection, which the fire chief will address in just a few minutes. Currently there's no fire hydrants in that area of our ETJ, which these lines would connect, and better water flow for the town and county through the Barden Water District. And we are going to be using $222,769 of our American Rescue Plan to help fund this project. And we're requesting $1,115,000 of the county's allocation of $446 million that you have. But you could choose how to fund the project the way you want to, but it's eligible under the American Rescue Plan. The state of North Carolina has $350 billion, and on page 3 of the outline that I gave you, it addresses the water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure of how it can be funded through the American Rescue Plan. In page 7 of the handout that I gave you on facts of the American Rescue, recipients may use coronavirus state and local fiscal responsibility funds to invest in necessary improvements to the water and sewer infrastructure, including projects that addresses the impact of climate change. Recipients may use the funding to invest in any of the drinking water infrastructure projects, such as building or upgrading facilities and transmission, distribution, and storage systems, including replacement of lead service lines. Recipients may also use the funding to invest in wastewater infrastructure projects, including constructed public-owned treatment infrastructure, managing and treating stormwater or subsurface drainage water, facilitating water, and ensuring public-owned treatment works. So there is funds from the American Rescue Plan for the water line and the flood mitigation. And with that, I'll close my presentation. If you have questions.
Any questions for the mayor?
Mayor, I got one, sort of follow up on a question I asked your engineer. Do you have sewer down that way to help with development of that property?
No, sir. Our sewer line stops at Ballpark Road and under our current sewer, we're at capacity. We're looking at our next USDA rural development project is for improving inflow and infiltration in our current system. But in order to service any expansion in our ETJ, we would have to have a new sewer treatment plant. And we're working with the county to see if that needs to be, we would alliance with the county or alliance with Pine Level to make it a regional system. So we could, even if we were to get a certificate, it would be 3 to 5 years out before we could even provide sewer to any additional users.
Any more questions for the mayor? Thank you, Mayor. So you got Fire Chief would like to speak to us.
Good afternoon. I just want to take just a few moments to let you know on the reference to the fire department. We've had 16 rescues in the last since Matthew. We had 16 rescues in Matthew in regards to retrieving people from flooded homes or floodwaters. That doesn't sound like a lot unless you're the one waiting at the end of the line for us to get there. That's the first thing. Second thing is the anxiety that goes along with that, and the majority of those were unable to get out themselves. So we're talking about elderly or either handicapped. Most of those came from Elm Street, Pine Street, Center Street, which is the main part that you saw up there, including the Beaver Dam. Also on Azalea Drive, we had an issue down there in Matthew, and if I remember correctly, there was 12 or 13 inches of water in those homes at the very end of Azalea Drive. We also had water running across 70 and Block 70 for almost 2 hours. The last two storms, there was 2 Mondays in a row. One, we had 6 inches of water in the same home, and we had to rescue those elderly couple from that particular place. I'm not sure if they've got the home repaired now or not, but that's almost a yearly thing now for those individuals. So we plan for that. We plan for the worst, but hope for the best. You know, we're still trying to get them out. So obviously that causes some anxiety, and we do our part, but that would certainly benefit the residents in regards to, I guess, their mental health. Also, I would suggest to you that on the Progressive Church Road, and that would be near Cloverdale, I've been on the fire department there for 34 years, and only in the last 4 or 5 years have we really seen the type of water in that particular area. Now, that's from the town, 3rd Street, all the way out to the elementary school, where we literally, we will not take a fire truck down. It's just too much. So that has become an increasingly inherently dangerous area also. I'd also like to speak for just a moment on the water situation. We are in the process of, we're waiting on our ISO report to come back from the Department of Insurance. We anticipate that it will be an entire district-wide rating at this particular point. That'll be a benefit for the town and for the county. But still, it will be utilizing what we call a tanker task force, which means we'll be hauling water and not have a hydrant local. If we have hydrants on the roads, which would be Massey Holt, possibly Old Hinton, and also on New Bar Park, that will help us tremendously in regards to fire protection. Obviously, we would prefer in the residential area 500 feet, but 1,000 feet will do it, as long as we take precautions and make sure we know what we're doing there. In the past, 26% of our district has been completely without hydrants, and we've tried to work with that, but the water system, I think there was a question about the water system earlier, and also the dead end parts. The water system coming from Brogdon and meeting up there at Princeton, we have less than 300 gallons a minute, I believe, on this, if we were to put a hydrant there. We can't because the county requires 500 gallons a minute. That would help allow hydrants to be placed down that road in the future. That is extremely important. The second thing is that we are willing to put the hydrants in. We actually looked at a grant to buy hydrants, but until you get it to the 500 GPM, we can't do that. So it will benefit all the way around. That's what I want to share with you. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer any that I have knowledge of.
Any questions for the chief?
Yeah, on this proposal here along Massey Holt Road, well, South Pearl Street, there would be hydrants along that if this water line was put in, is that right?
On Massey Holt Road, yes. Yes.
Okay. That's dramatic, going from 190 gallons per minute to 900 gallons.
That would be tremendous.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Any more questions, comments? Thank you, chief.
Thank you.
By all means.
Good evening. I'm Marla Ashworth, Town Administrator for the Town of Princeton. I appreciate you listening to our presentation tonight. I had a couple of small things I wanted to add because I don't have anything technical to say about drainage or water lines. But Johnston County is the fastest growing county in North Carolina. It grew 28% in the last 10 years. Well, Princeton grew 10%. It also grew 10% from the 2000 census to 2010. So we've been plugging along for 20 years at the same rate. And so we're trying to do some things that'll make Princeton attractive. So if people know that Princeton floods, they're not going to look at relocating Princeton. People aren't going to invest in subdivisions in Princeton. Right now, we don't have any subdivision lots available in Princeton, and we don't have any subdivision excuse me, applications before us. So everything we're talking about tonight, we're trying to do to improve what we have, to become more attractive, and to be able to grow like the rest of the county's been growing. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Braswell.
About 30 years ago, I realigned the ditch that they're talking about modeling now. So it's lasted 30 years. It was in conjunction. We were building the Little League field there, and it went right across the property we just bought. So I kind of made it in conjunction with DOT, of course. But this project that they're talking about is going to, that will be a major drainage thoroughfare for all the water leaving town. Princeton has the distinct advantage of having 4 watersheds, one on each area of the county, and unfortunately, a lot of the water goes toward Beaver Dam Creek. The majority, that's the main drainage structure in the town. But Princeton is growing. All of Johnston County is growing. They've got a really, their school is really a desirable point of education for a lot of the kids. And the Princeton school system's a valued asset to us, and people like to locate in the Princeton School District. So we're growing. Down that south side, there are subdivisions that are popping up they're outside the city limits, but they're growing in that area. And this water along Ballpark Road will serve some of those to get them off wells and on county water, town water, all county water at that point. Mm-hmm. But it's very discouraging when people ride through town. For one, I came back through town about 2-3 weeks ago, and I come back in through Holt's Pond Road there going out to my home, and I drove through 8 to 9 inches of water across Holt's Pond Road, all the way from one ditch to the other. The fields were flooded, the yards were flooded, and I've seen that happen 3 or 4 times in the last few years. This is a project that, when you look at it, they're upsizing culverts and all now, but as the town grows, this watershed will be able to be directed to that Beaver Dam Creek. It is sufficient to carry it. Once they get the beaver dams out of there, and I think the only place to relocate beavers is beaver heaven. But once they get them all out of there, that area will really grow.
By the way, we increased our budget this year for beaver mitigation.
Yeah, we spend quite a bit in Moccasin Creek every year on our budget to make sure they stay out of our system. But we've about eradicated them in the Moccasin Creek area there. But I think this is a great project. I, for one, would never complain about funds, especially if they're coming from the federal, it's like we don't ever have to pay that back, you know. But anyway, I think this is a good project, and I would really appreciate y'all considering it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, does that about wrap it up with your presentation?
That is our presentation.
Okay, all righty.
You got one of your council members present, right, Mayor?
And as a policy, I normally recognize elected officials in the room, so.
Well, Mike Rose, I appreciate you recognizing me. I feel as though everyone has presented what we needed to have presented, and I appreciate you considering this project.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. All right, board, you've heard the request, and
I did have one quick clarification.
Okay.
So I see the request for the stormwater, $715,000. Is that just a percentage of the 2.8? Is it three? I got three projects add up to 720, but I didn't know if there's particular projects that add up to that 715.
Yes,
if you would, for the people watching at home.
The South Pine Street project there is kind of priority number one, and like Tyler said, actually, today DOT was actually digging up the Pine Street culvert, and we had to ask them to put it back in the ground, so it's unpaved if you drive over it right now. But the South Pine Street project and the South Walnut Street project, and then a portion of that West 1st Street, West 2nd Street, John Street, we plan on phasing that, and that's how we came up to the 17.
Okay.
I wish I'd asked that earlier.
This is perfect example of what I was talking about this morning. It's a lot of data, a lot of money dumped on us in the past 30 minutes, and to think, at least for me, I'll speak for me, maybe y'all smarter than I am, but there's no way I can make an intelligent decision at this time, just looking at this for the first time. I think we need to take it under advisement, talk to staff, and in our next meeting we can take whatever action we want to.
This morning, we heard from the emergency management personnel, and some people might look at this and say, this is a town project, what's the county doing with it? The town is in the county. And when I think about all the emergency situations that arises in all these storms we're having, if we could solve a problem anywhere, that allows our emergency management people to be other places. So I look favorably upon this. I think Commissioner Smith has a good point.
And he does have a good point, and I could really get on my soapbox about why they're flooding and what we have done in the other parts done, Incorporated County, and the money we spent. I could go on and on. But good point. Now, one point you brought up this morning as it pertains to hearing the information, taking it up at the next meeting, was emergency. I don't think anybody's asked if we got a timeline on this, Mayor.
We have put the project out for bid. The bid should be in within 30 days. We're going to be using our money for the initial part of it. We're in hurricane season. Time is of the essence for the flood mitigation part. Delaying it 2 weeks or a month would be detrimental. The studies have been done. We've been proactive in working on it. In the water line, 2 weeks probably wouldn't make that much difference on the water line, but both projects are needed for public safety, for fire prevention, and for flood mitigation is critical for our community, and we would like to respect this both projects go forward.
Well, where I've got to be careful is we've had a discussion already, not with this issue, but issues like this, on being able to get the data, the information. They're hearing it first time, they want to process it, whatnot, which is reasonable for this board to understand. Now, if I was in your shoes and a board member says I would be inclined to approve this if I had 2 weeks to process it, I'd probably go that route versus there's no way I can vote for it tonight. But it's the first time I'm hearing it. So if I might be getting you 2 weeks. But let's hear what other board members have to say.
Well, Mayor, excuse me, I'm sorry.
I was going to ask a question, Mayor, so
I was going to ask a question there.
While he's up
All
here.
right. You said,
And then maybe the engineers need to answer some of
I
those
promise you,
questions.
I don't know enough to ask engineers anything. But you said 2 weeks or 30 days. Now, there's a difference, Mayor, between 2 weeks and there's a difference between 30 days. So,
If you got it out to bid for 30 days, and that allows us 2 weeks, we meet again in 2 weeks, so that should be ample amount of time.
Let the
While they're coming up to think about that, we also think about what the construction schedule is. He mentioned the time critical with the bid date. What is the construction for those phases that we're looking at for the 715?
So
you said that
what's so
digging
critical about
whenever
this is DOT's willing to participate right now, and getting the maintenance crew back out there for county maintenance. It may be hard after the fall season. That's been the real trigger with all this. So we're trying to get some work done by them currently, which has to be coordinated with some of the ditch work within the town. So the construction schedule right now on that South Pine Street project is really contingent upon the DOT scheduling of the project. That's the main scheduling issue right now. So construction timeline relative to the whole project there on the South Pine Street project, which is the main priority, is we were trying to get it done by the end of the year. That's the main concern.
Okay. Well, I'm at advantage because it is my district, and I have researched and know the details, so I've had a chance. I'm, that's where my advantage is. But I think Mr. Hester would like to speak, the county manager.
Yes, sir. Gentlemen, I want to thank Mayor Raines and Councilman Rose, Marla Ashworth, that met with Ms. Farmer and myself a week or so ago. And as Ms. Farmer and I talked about some things after that, as it relates to the flooding project or stormwater, addressing the federal funds, the county, if the board chose to participate, we would check on those federal funds to be used, because ultimately the county is responsible for those funds wherever they're spent, and I guess things would have to be in the bid documents as noted with the federal coronavirus regulations and funds. And that would be the preference. But if that, for some reason, that language was not, and those kind of things aren't in those bid documents, we would have to come out of general fund. So I just want to make that clear. And we have not seen the bid documents, and maybe the engineer can address that. If those bid documents and those things have the kind of language that the federal government requires for those, if the board chose to participate. And I'm speaking clearly about the 715 at this point.
So excuse me, I'm here to understand that you need some time to figure out.
Well, I mean, it would be helpful for us to have an opportunity to speak with the team about those specifics, and they may be able to address it now, but I know that those COVID funds, no matter where the county, how the county allocates it, the county is responsible for reporting that information. So I just want to make sure all that's clear. If not, it would be an appropriation from general fund if the board participates.
Yes, it does. So whatever we need to do as far as the documents, that's something we're completely familiar with, as far as making sure the federal correct documents, structure is put in place with the construction documents. We're more than happy to work with Chandra or the county manager's office and make sure those are reviewed and put in place, and any kind of oversight they need to do.
What's the pleasure of the board?
And also, we're using our ARP money. We have to comply.
Yes.
For our part. So it would be compliant language that's in sections, page 7, section 6 of that document that I gave you has not all the language, but the general terms.
Yeah, whatever oversight the county would like to see, we're comfortable with that.
I mentioned one other.
Yes, sir.
And I know you're talking mainly about the 715 right now, but on the Waterline project, I do know there's been discussions over the past year. Ms. Farmer each year budgets money, some funds for these type things to eliminate some dead ends. And our thought process was, and I've shared this with Ms. Ashford last week, I think it was there's been some discussion about if the county participated maybe on a percentage basis of that. As best we could figure out the value to the county as well, you know. And so for that part, we would like to come back with a recommendation on that water line, if there's time on that.
Okay, noted. There's been a request from a commissioner for 2 weeks to review, as we discussed this morning, on all cases similar to this. Is there any, that was not necessarily a motion, is there any other?
This is not the first time I've heard of this. Is this, did y'all, I mean, I've had a conversation with the county manager and with town people over the last couple of weeks, last week.
No, once again, I'm very thorough in it, but once again, it's my district, so I've reached out.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, this is the first time I've seen it, and I would like to have a little bit of time to digest it. I think they've done a great job with the presentation. It's certainly a needed project. I feel the distress of the fire chief. I mean, I get it, but I still think we need a little bit of time to talk about it and look at it. And unless everybody else has already seen it, I haven't seen it. This is the first I've seen these documents, so
Was that
I'm not an underachiever, but I need a little time to read through it.
I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth this morning. I think that the 2 weeks is probably needed. I personally, on this issue, I think it's a great, a much-needed project. I think the town, as I said earlier, you know, has been really foresighted looking at these issues ahead of time and having a plan in place and being ready to go with the project. But I do understand, you know, other commissioners, it's a fairly big decision. There's other towns I'm sure are going to come to us with other issues. And so I think this kind of sets the groundwork. If you come to us, you know, don't expect an immediate decision that night, because there may be more complicated issues that come to us and we need that extra 2 weeks. So I'm going to say, and go back to my original thing this morning, is let's take the 2 weeks to get everybody up to speed.
The only thing that, Commissioner, I understand the 2 weeks, and I want to make sure we move forward into 2 weeks of whatever disposition we need to do. However, we may not be ready to do final disposition of the water part issue. So,
and I don't think it's as time sensitive.
I don't think it's time sensitive. So,
I would agree. We're dealing with two separate issues, and I was referring to stormwater. Thank you for
and because I was very familiar with this project, I did state at the beginning we need to look at this as a board from two projects, not one. And so, it's my understanding that, well, it's just an understanding. Does anyone want to offer a motion on what we discussed this morning?
I would, but my understanding and my reference point of how I'm making a decision here is the mayor has asked us to try to mitigate this issue with some COVID money or the CARES Act. And from what I understand, our staff needs more time to make sure all the correct documents are in place. So I'm gonna make a motion that we take this under advisement for 2 weeks.
On the stormwater.
On the storm.
On all of it.
On all of it.
That'd be fine.
I'll second that.
Got a motion, got a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Guys, we'll
see you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks. I don't think we need a presentation. All righty. Plan and activity report. Next on the agenda. Braston.
Thank you. Thank you, Captain.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, give you a brief update on planning activity. With our focus being on our land use plan that is underway. So next step is steering committee will be reconvening next Tuesday night at the auditorium. We're in the auditorium at the Ag Center at 6 p.m. This is to continue further discussion related to the existing condition survey and vetting our current land use plan goals. So what we had done in previous month, the steering committee had gone through each of the goals established in the current land use plan to determine one of three things: either it stays, it goes, or it stays with some type of added or modification. Once we completed that meeting, I reviewed it with the results from that with the consultant team, and we just didn't feel like we had what we thought we needed from that discussion.